Returning now to Pierre Poilievre's speech today, Poilievre outlining his plans to build Canada's economy and how he would help the Canadian auto sector.
The Conservatives will fight for a tariff-free auto pact with the United States, with shared protections against Chinese imports. In short, here's the deal. We should agree to keep Chinese vehicles out if Americans agree to let Canadian vehicles in. A full exemption to Buy America rules so that our companies can compete on construction projects, and a relaunch of the Keystone XL pipeline.
I'm joined by Brian Kingston, President and CEO of the Canadian Vehicle Manufacturers Association. Brian, good evening and thanks for your time.
Thanks for having me on.
So Pierre Poilievre proposed a new auto pact in his address today. What are your thoughts about this proposal?
Well, I think it's bang on. It's exactly the type of proposal that we need to be making to the Americans. The auto industry is under extreme pressure right now because of Section 232 tariffs and because of the uncertainty around the future of our trade agreement. We've been making the case that if we want to strike a deal with the Americans, keeping China out has to be priority number one. We were on the right track. We had a tariff in place on Chinese EVs. And of course, that position has now been reversed by the government. And I think that's a mistake. And I think that's going to be a problem for us. So if we're going to get to the table with the US, if we're going to strike a tariff-free auto deal, keeping China out has got to be priority number one.
Okay, let's split that into two parts about dealing with the US and dealing with Chinese EV vehicles. First, I want to ask you about the Americans here and how possible and realistic do you really think this is, what Pierre Poilievre is suggesting, looking at the fact that for President Trump, a good relation equals to a good trade deal. And that includes tariffs.
Yeah, there's no doubt that this is not going to be easy. However, I come back to the numbers, and a relationship between Canada and the US in auto is good for America. I believe there is a deal to be had because the Americans send more cars to Canada than any other market in the world. And in fact, they run a trade surplus with Canada in auto. So it is in the US interest to get to a point where we have duty-free access and return to an open North American automotive market. In addition, as the US is going to compete with China, you need North America. You can't fight China with one hand behind your back, and that's what's happening right now. So no doubt it will be difficult, but this is a good start, and I do think it's in the US interest to work with Canada on this approach.
But the deal about China and Chinese vehicles coming in, Brian, we understand it's in very limited capacity. It's not like the gates have been completely open for Chinese EVs to come into the market, and they have a cap.
There is a cap, but experience will show how China does this. Yes, it's only 49,000 vehicles. That's about 3% of the market. It's 1/3 of EV sales in this country, so that's not insignificant. And make no mistake, once China has gained a foothold in this market, they will find ways to get more quota every single year. And if Canada doesn't provide that, they have leverage. They'll find ways to reduce our access for canola and other important exports that we were sending there. So we've opened the door, and this is a mistake. All you have to do is look at Europe. Europe has opened the market to China, 90,000 auto jobs lost in the past couple of years. So this is the path we're going down, and we still have time to reverse course and work with the Americans on the approach to China.
Speaking about job losses, Brian, while of course Pierre Poilievre reiterated time and again his support for a strong domestic auto sector, we have seen even this government, the Prime Minister, just I think it was earlier this month, February, so much happens in a month, they announced like an auto policy of sorts with repealing of EV mandates, consumer incentives, infrastructure support, etc., etc. So how do you think what the Conservative leader is saying, approach is different from the Prime Minister? Because despite what he has said, we are also seeing job losses here. You mentioned job losses. We've seen them in Stellantis, we've seen them in GM, and we had to change course one way or another.
Well, you know, this is what I like about what the Conservative leader said, but it's also what the federal government is doing. We have to control what we can control. We ultimately don't guarantee the outcome of these trade discussions with the U.S., but we can make Canada more competitive, and the auto strategy was a good first step. We had an EV mandate that was hugely damaging and costly. That is gone. But there's more to do. I mean, in BC and in Quebec, they have their own electric vehicle sales mandates that sit on top of our existing emissions regulations. This is self-defeating policy that makes it costly to do business in this country and ultimately weakens our leverage when we go into negotiations with other countries because we're doing it with a weak domestic economy. So there is more that can be done. We need to get rid of internal trade barriers and make Canada the most competitive jurisdiction for manufacturing in the world. That will position us for success.
Brian Kingston, President and CEO of the Canadian Vehicle Manufacturers Association. Brian, thank you for your time.